Okay, we're live. This is John Médaille, and I'm speaking today. An idea advanced by Amar Patel from the American Solidarity Party. And I'm just going to wait a few minutes to see if anybody's going to sign in here. So if you're watching this, click like or haha or anger, whatever you feel like, and we'll get started. So, where are we? I see 5, 6. Is that people watching this? I don't know. I have no idea. So I see a eyeball with 5 next to it. So does that mean we got 5 people watching? Here we go. Nicholas Rouse. Hello, Nicholas. Brandon, yes. Andy, Ross. Brian is here. Jeff James. Timothy Jones and Mike Harvey joined. Daniel Nichols joined. Jack Quirk. Oh, I see. It's all the gang of all the usual suspects. Okay. Very good. Very good. Well, let me get started then. I'm going to talk about distributism and its relation to the American Solidarity Party. Now, if somebody's going to talk about economics, I think the first thing they should do is talk about their qualifications, okay? And this is going to be real short because I haven't got any, okay? That was easy, right? I have a master's degree in theology, not economics. However, my work in theology has been at the conjunction of the moral order and the economic order. And I think the grave sin of the modern age is that we have bracketed off the moral order from the economic order. So for the past 15 years, I've been teaching at the University of Dallas couple of interesting courses, one on the introduction to the Bible, but another one on social justice. And this course is designed for business students because the University of Dallas wanted their business students to have a background in Catholic social teaching. And as far as I know, they're the only university who requires their business students to be well versed in the social encyclicals. I see Stratton's joined the group, so he could tell me how he could tell you all how well or poorly that works out. All right. So in conjunction with that book class, and I started this about 15 years ago. I first found out that there actually was no textbook to teach Catholic social teaching to business students, so I had to write a textbook. So this is my textbook, Vocation of Business, Social Justice in the Marketplace, which my students will recognize. I don't say they will have read, but they will have recognized. They will have recognized it. Now, after that, I wanted to focus more on distributism specifically, and my next book was towards a truly free market. And this book aims to give an economic foundation to distributism because the distributists themselves didn't write all that much about economics as a political science. So, and the American conservative was kind enough to say the best alternative economic thinking in a long time. Now, if you want, you can read that book in its Romanian translation, Spre o piața cât adevărat libera, or its Italian translation. Nicholas, I'll know you'll want to get this. Distributismo, una politica economica di equità e di equilibrio. Or you can read it in its Polish translation, and I know that'll be very popular, and I'm not even going to try to read that title, so you'll just have to take my word for it. And then I've also done a number of introductions to other books. And so here's a forward I wrote to reissue of B. Jarrett's The Social Theories of the Middle Ages, and have essays in a number of other books. Adrian Papp's The Crisis of Global Capitalism. Now, this work is a series of essays commenting on Benedict the 16th social encyclical. And then here's a collection of essays from The Front Porch Republic, Localism in the Mass Age. Now, if you're not familiar with the Front Porch Republic, which is where I do most of my blogging, you really should take a look at it. I think you'll enjoy it. Very interesting essays there, very wide-ranging. Okay, and then here's another one, Essays over het midden. Here's another book in a language I don't understand, but I have an essay in it, Essays over het midden. I forgot what that means, quite frankly. All right, those, and then there's essays in about a half dozen other books. So, such as they are, those are my qualifications. Now, the format here is Amar Patel put out a survey on the American Solidarity Party sites, and he came up with a number of questions. And what I am going to do, thank you, Nicholas, what I am going to do is, first I'm going to sort of do an introduction of about 10 or 15 minutes, which will kind of address those questions, or most of them, and then kind of open it up and start picking things from the comments and see if there's anything people want to further discuss. And well, we'll try to make this a conversation rather than a monologue. Okay, so from the questions that Amar provided me, there's kind of a theme to them. So he asks, how is distributism different from our current economic system? How is distributism different from socialism? Very good question. How could you elaborate on how distributism might be integrated into a free market economy? What is the difference between capitalism and the free market? And then there's a couple of others I'll get to here in a minute. But I'm going to start with those because what all of these questions demonstrate is a real concern for the free market and how distributism interacts with that market, and how it compares with capitalism and socialism. Well, here's the first and most important point I want to make. Capitalism is not the free market. In fact, capitalism is the bitter enemy of the free market. It has never been a free market system, not now, nor at any time in its history. Wherever capitalism advances, the free market retreats. Now, I know that's difficult for many people to hear because we have sort of joined rhetorically free market and capitalism and kind of made them synonyms for each other. But they're not. They're different and antithetical things. Okay, what do I mean? Well, the end result of capitalism, the more advanced a capitalist system is, what you will always find is that production is gathered into vast corporate collectives, and that every market segment is dominated by 2 or 3 firms which form a cartel that controls the market. Think about any area of the economy. Go into the grocery store and look on the shelves, and it looks very free market. You have thousands of products, and it looks like there's open and even wild, extravagant competition. But if you look at the labels, you'll find, for example, in the cereal aisle, all those dozens and dozens of brands are made by just two manufacturers, Post and Kellogg, General Mills. You're going to find two companies at the top. And you'll see a lot of other brands, private label brands, perhaps the brand of the supermarket itself, and you'll find they're made in the same factories. They just put a different label on it, okay? Look at whatever area of the economy you like, from beer to banking. Beer, there's a good example. Well, we have dozens and dozens and dozens of brands, right? Well, yeah, but there's really only two companies, InBev, Bush, and South African brewing company Miller, and they control about 80% of the market. Now, the last I heard, they were trying to merge. So there'll be, in effect, one beer supplier in the market. Banking, you have maybe 2 or 3 banks which are systemically important. And if these banks go down, the government has no choice but to rescue them. Eye care, right? I wear glasses. A lot of us wear glasses. That's a free market, isn't it? Because you got Pearl Vision, you got Vision Works, you got Walmart Vision, et cetera, and the frames, there's 25 brands to choose from, right? They're all owned by Luxottica of Italy, all of them. It's not a free market, it's a monopoly. All right. Well, if capitalism isn't the free market, then what is a free market? Let me suggest that you always measure the freedom of the market by the barriers to entry. How difficult is it for firms to get in and get out of a business? And you can always tell when you have a free market by the degree of competition. Free markets will always be competitive markets. There will always be a lot of firms trying to entice you to buy their product. So and none of these firms will have any real pricing power. That is, in economic terms, they will all be price takers, not price makers. That is not the situation in any advanced capitalist economy. It's always monopolies and oligopolies, just one or a few firms dominating the whole market. Okay, so what does a free market require? Well, if you measure a free market by the degree of competition, then what you need is a lot of competitors. And how do you get a lot of competitors in a market? You have to have capital distributed as widely as possible through the market. Okay? And that's what distributism is. When property is not accumulated together in vast corporate entities, but spread as widely as possible through the economy, so that a very high percentage of the population is in fact property owners and could either establish their own business or join with their neighbors to establish co-ops, etc. All right. Now, if the distribution of property is the issue for distributism, and it is, well, some will say, aren't you just talking about socialism? Okay, that is both, let me suggest, both a very naive question and at the same time, a question that goes to the heart of the matter. What do I mean? Well, it's a naive question because socialism, at least of the type the questioner is thinking of, is where there is no private property, or that is where nobody owns anything, or what comes to the same thing, everybody owns everything. So that's not really private property or personal property. Okay. Distributism would seem to be the opposite. Distributism is where everybody owns something. So obviously those are complete opposites. Yet the question really is, nevertheless, is very profound, because although distributism isn't socialism, nevertheless, distributism does recognize that property is a social reality. It is a social creation. This is, and we're talking here about productive property and especially natural property. The property that no man can make. Property like land, or the air, or water resources, things like that. These are things made by God. And God gives them to all of mankind for our common usage. But although they're given to all mankind, they're only productive if certain kinds of property must be used privately. That is to say, two farmers cannot plow the same field, one for corn and one for wheat. It has to have private usage. And so how properties divide up their property is a social question. Okay. So distributists recognize the social nature of property and recognize the danger of gathering ownership into one or a few grand collectives, be they corporate collectives or government collectives. Okay. Well, what then is the relationship between the market and socialism? Because that's the way the question always comes down to us. And politically today, and this is very interesting today, this happens occasionally, but it hasn't happened for 40 or so years, where we're actually having a discussion now in the public politics about socialism. But they're being presented as polar opposites, okay? So you have socialism or capitalism, and capitalism being confused or confounded with the free market. Let me respond by saying that capitalism and socialism are not contraries, they're complements. That is to say, every market depends on a vast structure of socialized goods, or that market cannot be. I mean, it doesn't matter how good you are at making products. If there are no roads to carry them to market, you will not be successful. If every entrepreneur had to dig his own latrine, drill his own well, provide his own police protection, educate his own employees and customers, and provide for the 100 other services that are socialized in our system and in most other systems, he would have no time to devote to his business. So without these socialized services, you cannot have a market. Okay, so the free market depends on a sort of infrastructure of socialized goods. And these goods in turn depend on the market to be funded. Okay, so there is a reciprocal relationship, not an antagonistic relationship between socialism, or at least socialized goods, and the market. Okay. Further, what the market really needs is rules. Okay. Now, here's the problem. No one would enter the market if they didn't think there were rules. If they didn't think, when somebody tells you a pound, something, when you buy a pound of something, that you've actually bought 16 ounces of that product, that the money is going to be good, that there are certain laws of contract that people have to obey, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, without rules, you will not have a market. You can think of it as analogous to sports. Without a rule book and a referee to throw the yellow flag when somebody grabs a face mask, nobody's going to step on the football field. The risk of death or injury would simply be too high. So markets like games need rules. The only question is, who will set those rules? Will those rules primarily be set by the public according to some scheme, or will they be simply set by the most powerful players in the market? Well, we certainly have government rules governing markets, but in a lot of markets today, perhaps most, you will find that it's not the government that sets the rules. That is not Washington, D.C. It's Bentonville, Arkansas that sets the rules. Okay? Walmart sets the rules for anybody who wants to have shelf space in a Walmart store. Amazon sets the rules for anybody who wants to sell on their site. And they, and not the government, will be the primary controlling factors. So somebody's going to write rules, or you wouldn't have a market. Okay. All right. So, what distributism then aims to do is establish a free market by the wider distribution of property, okay? So that anybody can, now this implies some things like more localization of markets. So getting away from globalized markets to localized markets. Let me say that while globalism is for certain things a good thing, for most things it isn't. And in fact, the only reason you have a globalized economy is because of vast government subsidies. And I'll just take one example, Walmart, the big box store. The claim of Walmart is that it is cheaper to make socks, for example, an easily made item, in the interior of China, but put it on a train and ship it to Shanghai, offload it from the train and put it on a boat and ship it to Long Beach, offload it from the boat and put it on another train and bring it to Bentonville, offload it at Bentonville, put it on the trucks and send it out to Walmart distribution centers, and offload it again onto a truck and ship it out to Walmart stores. That's nonsense. So how does that work? Well, it works mostly through government subsidy. That is, it works through the primary subsidy that we can see is the freeway system. Okay? If the freeways had to pay the full cost through a weight and distance toll, Walmart would dry up and blow away. It would be shown to be the inefficient production system and distribution system that it is. And you would find with weight and distance tolls that the local production, the production with the shortest supply lines and the shortest distribution lines would have an advantage over the global suppliers. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not against globalism. Why? Because the gifts of God are meant for the use of all men. But God, who as is well known, has a sense of humor, did not distribute these gifts equally. So some regions have more gold than they can possibly use. Others have more oil. Others have vast farmlands that can grow more food than they can possibly eat. And to make the gifts of God available for the whole world, you have to have global trade. Okay, so One region supplies the lack of another region, and they work together to supply to their mutual benefit. That's the logic of good trade. It's not making products you could make locally and shipping them halfway around the world. And you could get away with it because, well, the other subsidy is you just abuse the workers. You pay such low wages that nobody can compete with you. So trade is good from that standpoint of accomplishing the universal destination of goods, of making as many of the Earth's resources available to as many people as possible. This is global trade. It is not a means for driving down, as it has been used for the last 50 years, as a means of driving down the wages and disempowering labor so that they have no bargaining power. Okay. All right. Let me stop right there and see if there's any, let me look at the comments and see what comments we get. Father Martin, glad to see you. Dino, well, John Simmons says, nobody I know drinks their beer. Oh, I thought you said nobody you knew drinks beer. Well, you need to get out more often, John. Okay, let me see. Stratton Gerard asks, what about the charge many libertarians will lay that the reason corporatism does not equal capitalism and that oligarchies form because of government interference? Well, easy thing to say, hard thing to prove. The logic of capitalism, and here's the problem. There's two kinds of competition. Capitalism tends toward the bad kind. So the two kinds of competition, what are they? There's cooperative and agonistic competition. Cooperative competition is very rule-bound, and the object of cooperative competition is not to destroy the opponent, okay, or maybe only to do so symbolically. The exemplar of cooperative competition is sports. Sports, well, yes, there really is no winner and loser in sports. You know, really just the clock runs out and, well, one team is behind, you know, but it doesn't mean you go and you slaughter the losing players, burn their city, and carry their wives and children off to slavery. So it just means you pick it up next month or next year. You know, you start all over again. Agonistic competition is different. Cooperative competition aims at continuing competition. Agonistic competition aims at ending competition entirely. Okay, so you want to destroy the other player. Well, capitalism engages in agonistic competition. Okay, the idea is to destroy the competition. Okay, Stratton says, tell that to the Vikings. Stratton, do you mean the team or the nation? Okay. In any case, capitalism, the interior logic of competition capitalism is to wipe out the competition, is to always grow, is to always aggregate things, and so it always grows larger and larger and larger. And it is never satisfied until it reaches the monopoly condition, or at least can simulate a monopoly with a cartel. Okay, that's just the inner logic. Okay? And at that point, it has complete pricing power. Right? So it is not true that if there was no government interference, there would be no monopolies. Furthermore, capitalism itself is a creation of government. Okay, there has never been a capitalism that wasn't created by the government. As a matter of fact, so both in the United States and in England in 1832, when the Liberal Party came to power, a strict laissez-faire economy was their goal. What is amusing about this is that after the liberals, and by liberals they meant what we mean by libertarians, after the liberals came to power, the English government, the English free market government exploded. The size of the government grew and grew and grew. And this is always true under libertarian governments, ironically. Okay. All right. So, all right, I've lost the thread. Somebody remind me where I was. Oh, we're talking about libertarian economics. Yeah. So and this happened both in the United States. It was a deliberate government effort to establish both a capitalistic market and to create, by the way, a labor market. Labor markets, as we understand them today, are complete creation of the government. Okay. All right. So Leslie asks, wouldn't we have to create this through government intervention? Well, actually, you could create a lot of it by stopping a lot of government intervention, like freeways. What is the greater government intervention? Is it when the government gives the public resources away, or when it allocates costs back to the cost causers? So in the case of freeways, if they put weight and distance tolls on the freeway, is that government interference? Well, I don't think so. Although, if it is or it isn't, it's still, I think, the just thing to do. So the government is always, as I said, there's always these socialized goods which a market economy requires, so the government is always going to be involved one way or another. So the real question then is, where are the limits? Where should government be the primary rule setter? Where should rule setting be maybe outsourced to the industry itself, et cetera, et cetera? The real debate is where you put something like healthcare. Should that be a socialized good, a common good, or should it be completely a market good? Now, I'm not going to answer that here. I certainly have my own opinion, but I'm merely saying that's the proper bounds of the debate. Okay. Here's an interesting question from Grace Aldershot Garrett. Does the objective of allowing everyone to be economically productive on their own terms extend to thoughts on professional licensing? They had an interesting case here in Dallas. It must have been about, 10 or 12 years ago. So there was this lady in Oak Cliff, which is the black part of town, and she made her living braiding hair in her living room. Okay. Apparently, do these tight cornrows that are time-consuming and difficult to do, I guess. So anyway, that's how she made her living. Well, she was providing a useful service to her neighbors. It made her neighbors feel better about themselves, and as harming no one as far as I could see. Well, the world fell in upon her. First place, well, one, her house was not zoned for a beauty shop. Two, she did not have a cosmetology license. And we all know, and I'm sure you'll agree, Leslie, that if you were to, braid hair without having $3,000 of cosmetology behind you, that all sorts of things, probably the bubonic plague could break out. And, and speaking of which, one of the problems was she didn't have a sink in her living room, okay? She never have a sink in the same room that you're doing hair in, things like that. Well, they drove her out of business. This was a case, now it's the cosmetologist who drove her out of business. This was the case of the industry protecting itself through regulation. And too often, that's exactly what happens in regulation. Okay, it is what they call regulatory capture. That is, the people who are supposed to be regulated are the ones who end up making the rules, and they make the rules so as to erect barriers to entry. Okay, they keep as many people out as possible. So, yes. So rulemaking, in my opinion, should be a distributed process as much as property should. And there should be a wide variety of inputs to rulemaking. It should not be purely a government function, nor should it be purely a privatized function with the cosmetologist setting the rules of who can enter their business, etc. And as Jack Quirk points out, that's really the way regulation operated under the guilds. It was kind of a joint negotiation between the members of a particular profession and the sort of civic authorities and the wider authorities. All of those came together to make rules. Okay, let's see. So let me go through here and see if there's other, I'm sure there's going to be a number of questions. Oh, there's one question, yeah, on the list I didn't get to. Why should the government be concerned about economic inequality and equality? Okay, well, let me suggest that it has to do with the whole point of having an economy. You see, we have bracketed off the moral order from the economic order. And so we have no way to judge when an economy is working, because an economy is a moral enterprise. So you have to start, when you judge an economy, you have to ask, what's an economy supposed to do? Well, in a pure science, you don't ask that question. In chemistry, you don't ask an oughtness, or astronomy, you don't ask, what should the orbit of Venus be? It just is what it is. And so there's no moral question involved. There may be a moral question about how you use chemistry, but etc. But as far as chemistry itself, it's a physical science. Economics is a humane science, and every humane science is judged by whether it fulfills its purpose. What is the purpose of an economy? Well, by ignoring the teleological question, they try to reduce everything to a numeric question, and that is growth, GDP growth. One, the growth is not really an economic measure. You're not really measuring the output with GDP. What you're measuring is the cost of the inputs. What do I mean? Economic output is like cooking your dinner. Your dinner is the economic output. The money you spent buying meat and potatoes, that's the input, but it's not the output. Okay. Along with that, another input is the time you spent cooking the dinner. Okay, that's an input. But then the output is dinner with the family. Okay, that's the economic output. What happened? Why this is a problem? Think about this. So 40 years ago, 50 years ago, when I was growing up, most women did not work in the paid workforce. Okay, and when they did, they generally had part-time or supplemental income. Okay, women, for various reasons, more and more moved to the paid workforce, leaving less time at home. This means that a lot of the functions that women provided to the market now had to be substituted with money services. Okay, so women who, more and more meals were taken at McDonald's rather than at home, or you had to hire babysitters, or now the family needed 2 cars. So I was in the real estate business for many years. For Houses built in the 50s, the norm was a one-car garage. Then in the 60s, it began slowly. In the early 60s, you began to see two-car garage homes. By the end of the 60s, they were all two-car garage homes, okay? Two cars were needed. Well, so you needed more food services, more daycare, you need more packaged foods, you needed more home maintenance services, etc. All of these services, which substituted for the labor that wives and mothers used to give the economy, all these now had to be monetized. The GDP skyrocketed. Okay. But was there any more output? Were there any more meals cooked? Were there any more babies minded? Were there any more lawns mowed? No. The costs went up. That is, the GDP went up. The output, probably not. Okay. Let me give you another example. So, live in a city with a certain degree of security, and so you pay for that security, you spend a certain amount for police, courts, criminal justice system, etc. All of a sudden you have a crime wave, all right? Costs skyrocket. Okay. So now you have to have more police, more courts, more jails, more lawyers, etc. So the inputs, the GDP skyrockets, but the output is security. You may or may not have any increase in output whatsoever. In fact, things may be worse. So the measure of the economy then is how well people are doing. You want to see, to measure the economy, it's not a measurement, it's a judgment. It's a judgment informed by measurements, but it's not reducible to measurements. To take it back to equality and inequality, when most people can provide for their own security, when most people have enough money to provide for the needs of their family, etc., then you have a healthier society. That's one thing you have to judge. But when you have vast differences in wealth and poverty, you get any number of social, economic, and political pathologies. Economically, the more purchasing power is spread through the market, the stronger the markets are. That's how anybody makes an investment decision. Well, how many solvent purchasers are in this market? Can they clear the market if I bring goods to the market? So the wider purchasing power is spread through the economy, the stronger the economy becomes. Now, so we've had an upside down economy ever since the 80s. You see, we've come to believe in the trickle-down theory. So we give lots of money to the rich, and we hope that they'll trickle it down on us. Well, it doesn't work that way. The trickle down is what you do in that little room in your house. If you really want to expand markets, you need to inject money at the bottom, because society is lifted from the bottom up. So if there's more purchasing power spread through the economy, there'll be more business investment opportunities. Okay, there'll be more places for people to, figure out how to spend your money, by providing something you want or need. That's economically. Politically, however, when you concentrate wealth and power, when you concentrate wealth, you concentrate power. Or as Daniel Webster said, power follows property. Political speech, of course, is technically free, but in effect, if it's not funded, it doesn't really exist. Now, elections today cost billions and billions of dollars. Even to run for president, you have to have $50 billion in your pocket. This won't buy you the presidency, and it would be just a tiny, tiny bit of what you will spend, but it's just the down payment. Now, it's not that the rich are monolithic and that they fund only one point of view, but they really only fund a narrow point of view. And generally, a point of view, various points of view that really don't present a real challenge to them. So the political discussion can be no wider than political funding, at least not effective political discussion. Furthermore, all this money corrupts politics, and I don't think I have to expound on that issue. Finally, it has terrible social effects. When people feel that there's a wide division between rich and poor, that we're not in this together anymore, okay, then bad things socially start to happen. And so with this difference in wealth and poverty, what you're seeing today is a sharp increase in what's called the deaths of despair. So that's what's at the bottom of the opioid crisis. That's what's at the bottom of alcoholism. Okay, that's what makes heroin a market. Okay, and it's not just those, but it's the amount of antidepressives we need. I mean, it's an astounding, staggering market. So socially, speaking strictly in medical terms, we're sick. We're really sick. And it's this income inequality, this vast difference in income inequality. This is not to argue that income should be equal. They shouldn't. But when we have such vast differences as we have today, we have, I think, real social problems. Okay. Let's see. Matthew Bartko asked, what should the role of unions be in a distributist economy? Well, it doesn't matter what the role should be. The workers have the right to join together and bargain collectively, I think. Certainly, manufacturers and businessmen have the right to join together. But it's important. I think unions are always important because workers on their own, unless they have a very special skill, cannot really bargain individually. So it has to be labor that bargains. By the way, Adam Smith pointed out that whole problem with wages. He says the power in a wage negotiation is always going to be with the masters, as he called them. And the worker will have very, very little bargaining power, and the masters will drive down wages as much as they can. So the workers, there has to be, in order to set good wages, there has to be reasonable power on both sides, because that's how any negotiation works. Okay, both parties have to come to the table with some power, or there won't really be a negotiation. There'll be a dictation. Here's the terms you will accept. So, but we really do need to empower labor. Okay. Let's see. John Simmons says, except in Silicon Valley, that's an employer's market. Yes. Well, it is now. It's in some areas in Silicon Valley. In some specialized skills, yes. Don't worry, they'll fix that by outsourcing it. Need to start. No, Leslie, I didn't say we need to start at the bottom of society. I mean, we need to lift society from the bottom. That is, instead of giving money to the rich, which is what's been the economic policy of the last 40 years, is it to pump money in at the bottom. Okay, money spent at the injected at the bottom moves very, very fast. Okay, it is spent very quickly. So there's a parameter in economics known as the velocity of money. So the amount of purchasing power is not just the amount of money, it's how fast money moves through the economy. If you put money at the bottom, it moves very fast. People spend it very quickly because they must. Look, if you give Bill Gates, another $1 million, he doesn't know what the hell to do with it. He's got everything he needs, He puts it in a bank someplace, maybe in the United States, maybe in Bermuda, I don't know. But they have nothing. They just can't consume any more than they're consuming. But if you give it to the bottom, okay, people will build a better life for their family, or they'll start a business, or they'll upgrade their their house, their wardrobe, their diet, whatever. It moved very, very fast. So when you put money at the bottom, it moves fast. It almost instantaneously. So always start when building up society, start at the bottom, not the top. Okay. John Simmons suggests replacing welfare with the UGI. I don't know what the UBI. I don't know what the UGI is. Universal guaranteed income. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That was Milton Friedman's idea. Sure. Okay. Let me back up here. See what other questions we have. Stratton wants to know about the medieval roots of distributism. Well, in a sense, it's not so much medieval roots, it's universal roots. Distributism is, there's really only two approaches to wealth. The distributed or concentrated, okay? From the village economies up, wealth is created by distributing property to as many people who can apply their labor to it as possible. And this is sort of the basic economic system upon which everybody must operate. Now, if you get to, but sooner or later, higher level goods are needed, which cannot be provided locally. Mainly defense, okay? That's the first thing. You got to ensure that, pillagers don't come and burn your crop. That's a very bad thing. And here's the problem. The crop, takes months to grow, but it takes half an hour to burn. So that means the pillagers have a lot of power. So you have to have you have to have a defense force. And usually this requires an accumulation of property. And it starts from there and it just goes on. You develop an aristocratic class. The aristocratic class originally exists to serve the population. Eventually it comes to lord over the population and even to oppress the population. So in the Middle Ages, they kind of reached a compromise. So it started out as a slave society. Everybody was a serf. Serf after the fall of the Roman Empire. Serf being just the Latin servus, slave. But slowly, slaves don't make good soldiers. They just don't. Who cares what language the boss speaks? The orders are all going to be the same. So it's just not worth dying over. So, eventually, slowly, the serfs gained more and more and more customary rights over their own land until by the High Middle Ages, by the 13th, 14th century, they're practically peasants or yeomanry, okay? And their obligations in servitude are practically, are minimal. This all changes, of course, with the closure of the monasteries and the seizure of the commons, but nevertheless, the course that Europe took in this is very, very similar to the course of events that you'll see in China or India or indeed around the world. Distributism is sort of the basic economic system for any society, and it gets slowly replaced by some sort of oligarchy. Usually in the form of what I would call a dead aristocracy, an aristocracy that no longer has a military function or a governmental function to perform. They just are possessors of privilege, and that's pretty much the end of it. Okay, John Herring asks, isn't the Gini coefficient for the US now about the same as Mexico? Yes, yeah. We've become two countries. This is very much two countries. Okay, there is one country that is doing very, very well. Okay, and it comprises 30 to 40% of our citizens. There's another portion of our population 20 to 30% who might as well be living in a third world. Okay, they have no employment security. They do not make an adequate wage to support a family, or do so only under crude conditions. Okay, when they get up in the morning, they don't know if they're going to have a job still at the end of the day. Okay, they're at work at will employees, they're contract employees, they're the gig economy. Okay. Their employment situation is very, very precarious. Their wages tend to be very, very low, and their benefits minimal or none at all. See, having a job no longer means what it did when I left college. When you got a job, well, there was sort of a commitment on both sides, and you expected to work there for years, maybe even your whole career at this one place. And so there was sort of an exchange of loyalty. Company would do certain things for you, and you would do certain things for the company. Nobody takes that seriously anymore. You're there for as long as the company needs you. When they're finished with you, you're gone. Okay, you are gone. And that may be 2 years, that may be 2 weeks, maybe 2 hours. And as far as benefits, well, it's as little as they can get away with, or none at all. This socially is the worst thing. When you can't even advance by work, okay, then you have just struck a mortal blow, not merely economically and politically, but socially. And eventually, it all comes down to kind of a social, I don't want to say a social contract, because that's, that word has some overtones, but at least a social agreement about how society works. And when there is that agreement doesn't exist, well, you see this kind of social political pathologies that we're seeing today. Okay. John Simmons says corporate feudalism. No, John, I don't think so. I think the corporations would have to get a lot better to be feudal. I'd have fewer objections to corporate feudalism than to what's actually happening. I mean, if the whole thing about feudalism is that you can't get rid of the workers. They're on your farm forever, for life. That's not what we have. Corporate feudalism would be one hell of a step up from where we are. Okay. David Pawlowski, thank you very much for that comment. I have to tell you something that had the same comment from, I was giving it sort of a shortened version of my class to the deacons, deacon formation, the deacon formation classes, and so I teach this course to them as well. And at the end of the course, one of the candidates came up to me and he says, I have a master's degree in economics, and I studied that stuff for 3 years. And the whole time I knew there was something wrong. And he said, finally, I know what it is. And so I thought with your comment, I thought of that comment too. Yes. Okay. Hello, James Vogel, Michael Dakota. Let's see. I like to call them the modern day coal mines. Yeah, well, feudalism, it's your counted votes. Very good, John. Okay. All right. Let me see. Well, I can scroll back here forever. Anybody else want to pose a question? I don't see one. Okay. All right. So anyway, to sum this up, I think, one, we should not confound capitalism and the free market. Capitalism is the mortal enemy of the free market. Capitalism collectivizes production. It does not spread production out. Capitalism works against a market economy. It seeks the greatest pricing power it can get. So the truth about capitalism is that it has collectivized production in a way that would astound a Stalinist bureaucrat of the 40s or 50s. And a lot of the wealth that capitalism produces is in fact merely extractive wealth. That is, it's not really producing anything great. It's just dragging wealth out of the ground, say in oil or minerals, and adding it to the economy. Okay, but it's nothing that can be replaced. Once that stuff is used, it's gone. And where that really is a problem is in farming, because instead of techniques which regenerate the soil, they're using extractive techniques which degrade the soil. And sooner or later, as Wendelberry said, our problem isn't going to be peak soil, it's going to be peak oil. So, but in any case, the capitalism is not a free market system. Distributism, however, it is because distributism, by enabling people to produce goods locally, means that you will have any number of competitors in the market. And the competition will be cooperative competition. That is, it's highly unlikely that somebody can merely drive out all of his competitors. Competitors will in fact deepen the market and widen the market rather than narrow it. Okay, so let me see. So capitalism and a free market are different things, and distributism is more in line, well, is the necessary condition, I would argue, of a free market. Okay. All right. John Simmons, how do you enforce in distributism? Yeah. Well, the first thing you do is stop enforcing capitalism. Stop privileging capitalism. Stop subsidizing capitalism. The push costs back to cost causers as much as possible. I use the example of the freeways, but there are 100 other ways that capitalism gets subsidized. Okay. The other thing is, I think you have to empower and encourage on the other end. So I'm thinking of differential tax rates for employee-owned companies, differential regulation for small firms and big firms. Okay, if small firms should basically escape the heavy regulatory regimes that are necessary, really are necessary when you have mega firms. There really needs to be mega regulation. By distributing property around, you also distribute power around, you also lower the cost of regulations. And so the government can encourage localism in that way. You also have to, I think, you have to manage trade so that you're not disadvantaging work. You're not playing workers off against each other. So I would say we expect workers in every country to be paid a living wage, which isn't going to be a living wage in American terms. A living wage in Bangladesh or in China or in India is going to be much, much lower than a living wage in the United States. But we need for those workers to be paid a living wage in their own, in terms of their own culture, because this will lead to the expansion of their economies and the expansion of their labor markets, driving up labor rates in their countries, and pretty soon they'll be able to afford to buy stuff from us. So anyway, trade agreements are generally about capital. They should be about labor. Okay. All right. So I hope that I was able to deepen a little bit the understanding of distributism and answer what questions I was able to catch as they flew on by here on the comments screens. But in any case, if this was of interest to anybody, perhaps we can do it again. So really, thank you for your attention, and you all have a very good evening. Okay, good night.